Hey everyone, and welcome to MixCult. It's time to have some fun on your personal dub session here. Yes, it's MixCult Records with Mr. Robert and his assistant. My name is Kirill Matveyev. As always, we are broadcasting from St. Petersburg, Russia, presenting you mixes from MixCult Records, DJs and producers.
Ibiza Global Radio.
Oh well, congratulations Robbie, your dream comes true. It's just a great start of 2021. We decided to start a new sub-label called Believe in Records for those who believe in technologies, cosmos, UFO, outer space adventures. So Robbie is a curator of his new project. And Robbie, what is the first release? Oh, I think we have to talk to him. Let's call him right now. This is a special call that we make to introduce a new chapter in MixCult history. The spring 2020 lockdown let us sort a new artist with their releases, and this is how we discovered Scape One and the man behind this project, Kurt Bergery. Hello, Kurt.
Hello. It's good to meet you at last.
Yes. Tell us a bit where you are from.
Well, I'm on the south coast of England, so a small town called Bognor. It's sort of in between Brighton and Portsmouth, and about 60 miles south of London. So it's quite nice. It's a bit quiet, but I like it that way. So it's pretty good. And I'm near the beach, so even in lockdown, I can literally walk 5 minutes, and I'm on the beach, and I can just keep away from everybody. So that's good.
How did you spend last COVID year? What have you been doing?
Well, we've had a lockdown most of the time, so I've been at home. So spending time in the studio recording, doing shopping for my mum, just general things like that really, walking on the beach. So, but yeah, it's quite good. I mean, watching movies, the usual kind of thing. There's not much else you really can do. Whereas music, obviously people already know my music, so I can just record and then a week later I can sell it, sort of thing.
So it's going good. You mean you sell music well?
It has now. I mean, in the last sort of few years, it's started to pick up a lot more. And the good thing is you've got Bandcamp now. They saved my life in the last year, basically. The fact that they actually pay people directly is pretty amazing, really, for the music industry as a whole. And you can sell anything on there now, can't you? T-shirts, vinyl, everything. And it's brilliant because you get paid straight away, which is almost unheard of. So yeah, it's great. And it's also a good chance for people to connect with their, fans can actually connect with the actual artists. I don't like to say fans really, but...
What gears do you use for production?
Well, I've got two 808s, which isn't showing off. It's just that I brought my first one way back in 1985. 85, yeah, when I was young. I got into electro quite early.
Yeah.
And then recently a friend of mine found a new one which was so brand new I couldn't resist having it, so I ended up with two. And they do sound different because my original one, the serial number is something like 100. It's one of the very first ones they made, and it's got a very minimal sound to it. Whereas the new one, when he brought it round, it was one of the later models, so it was about 2 years later, and the kick was a lot lower, and the snare drum was a lot sort of snappier. So they actually do sound completely different. It might be due to the fact that I've already worn the old one out and it just sounds different because I've worn it out. But being analog, everything sounds different, doesn't it? You know, you can get,
sure, absolutely.
You know. So apart from that, I had to write it all down what I use actually, because I don't use a DAW much. I use MPCs, so I've got an old MPC 2000 XL which I use for my older kit. I've recently upgraded to an MPC 1 for the newer kit, so I've got like sort of two studios. I've got one where the 808 would be triggered from the MPC by a Kenton Pro Solo, and then the 808 would then trigger like a Juno and the SH101 to create that older sound, and that's the way I've always made music going back years and years and years. The problem with that obviously is you're recording in a very live environment, so when you record it that day you probably spend the whole day in the studio and then you're knackered at the end of the day. But you do come out with something special. But getting back into it, if people say, oh, could you like make the kick drum a bit louder or quieter, I'm like, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So
it was live.
Yeah, it was live. I mean, I do record every sound individually as well, but obviously that takes a long time, and at the end of a lengthy studio time, you don't always want to be spending another 10 minutes recording every tiny little bit. So I've sort of modernised a little bit now, what I'm in the process of. So using a lot, because there's so much new kit out nowadays, it's hard to keep up. But I've also got, we've got Dave Smith, I've got the Prophet 8 and the Mofo. The Mofo is a lovely kit. I've got the keyboard version. I've got the new Bergery TD3, which is basically a 303 again. Acid Labs Bomb Bass, that's really nice. That's a 303 but with more control on it. So that's a lovely machine. It's really evil sounding. And then new stuff from Korg and Arturia. Got some of their kit recently as well, which is really nice. So I'm always expanding or replacing, but I don't like to have too many bits of kit at once, because I find that you can overdo it. You can end up with too many sounds. It's nice to keep it minimal, isn't it? Unless you're layering pads upon pads to get nice deep textures. But I can get carried away some days and think, right, okay, I need to strip that down. You probably do the same thing yourself.
Okay, let's listen to your mix that includes some tracks of yours and get back in 10 minutes. And speaking about Bandcamp, this new vinyl release called Different Worlds, Same Stories is now open for pre-order on Believe in Records Bandcamp account as well as on MixCult Bandcamp page. The official release date is 21st of January, and now you can make your order with a special low price. The recording of the show you can find on MixCult SoundCloud page, including track list. And please don't forget to check MixCult on Facebook and SoundCloud to visit our site mixcult.net. Back to studio, and my next question to you: how long does it take you to produce a track? How much time do you spend for this?
It's a difficult one to ask. If I'm doing it with the older kit, I can write a beat on the 808 in literally 10 minutes, but then I can spend another 10 hours trying to get everything to layer on top of it. On average, about 2 days. Yeah, I do that. That's what I said. With the older kit, I will make sure I finish that track that day, and then I'll probably remix it again the next day because I haven't got to program everything. I can just change sounds. So I can spend a few days, and then I end up with various versions of it, and then choose the best one, or maybe I've got a few tracks that I can use from that. With the newer stuff, obviously you can save everything and go back to it, and I can spend a whole week, maybe even 2 weeks, just fine-tuning the track. But that's the beauty of modern equipment. You can literally spend a whole day doing a track and then listen to it and think, oh, I've overdone it again. I'll go back, strip some things out, edit the time. Because some tracks, you know, you think you're in the zone, and you end up with like 12 minutes of music, and you think, okay, it needs to be about 4 minutes or 5 minutes. So yeah, it depends on which studio, which part of the studio I'm using, really. So anything from a day to a week would be my answer.
Do you perform as a live actor, or you mostly perform as a DJ?
Basically, I used to like DJing a lot when it was the vinyl days. I found it a more sort of hands-on, whereas nowadays I think DJing has become, I wouldn't like to say mundane. I think it's horses for courses, as they say over here. It's all about the mixing, so everything's got to be, the BPMs have got to be right, which I do understand that, especially in a club environment. But I find that a DJ will only play electro or only play techno, and when you listen to it at home especially, it can sound a bit boring. Everything's the same, and I like a bit of variety. If I do a mix, I normally spend the first half playing all sorts of tracks, slow, fast, old, new, and then I do the last half hour of just straight mixing so that everyone's pleased with it. So as far as live's concerned, getting back to what we were saying before, yes, you could do gigs. You've got to take probably a small mixer, a drum machine, a couple of synths, some kind of control for everything. So a live setup like that is great, but obviously you're carrying a lot of kit around with you, so it can be quite difficult. But I think live is where it's at for me personally, I think it's the way that you can actually, because electronic music isn't actually live, but it is. I can see your cat in the background. I just had the same problem. I think live music, electronic music, if it's live, the only way you can really express that is with having a synthesizer, and you can actually twiddle the knobs and turn things and bring things in and out, and that's when electronic music really comes out, and people can see what you're doing, as opposed to, like you said earlier, if it's just a laptop and you're clicking, you're probably doing that thing, but you're doing it with one finger on a mouse, so the audience might as well go off and do their own thing, really, and leave you to it, sort of thing. So I prefer live personally, but I do understand, you know, the DJ is still probably the most important part of the industry, because that's how a lot of people get to hear this music. But I think this, you know, 20 years ago, DJs were everything, and everyone was looking at DJs. And I think in the last few years, especially with all of this new kit that Bergery are bringing out and Korg, I think live setups have becoming more the norm now in every genre of electronic music. It used to be just electro. Everyone was like trying to show off, oh look, I've got an 808, you know, and that was kind of in the techno and the house scenes, that wasn't so prominent at that time. So, but recently, everyone, you know, you go on YouTube and you see some amazing videos, lots of new young artists with all their kit out on the table, linked up, and it's amazing what they're doing with it. It's really exciting, and it's, you know, for someone who's been listening for this kind of music for 40 years nearly, it's great to see that it's still alive. I never knew that this kind of music would still be that popular today, but now it's bigger than ever, you know. I think it's down to the fact that in the late 70s, after punk especially, you had the synth scene, the disco scene, obviously punk and early hip hop. There was no internet, so half of those scenes didn't communicate with each other, and I still notice today, because I obviously, when I look back to music, I mean, even within hip hop, I mean, there was a scene in Miami and a scene in New York and a scene in Los Angeles that were doing early electro hip hop music, but they weren't communicating with each other, not much anyway. I didn't see that connection. Yet in England we had the electro series, and we all thought it was all one thing. We didn't realise there was Miami bass and techno hop from LA and hip hop from New York. We just put it all under one bracket. You know, we heard things like Cybertron. We thought it was all electro funk. We didn't realise that that was the birth of Detroit techno at that time.
Actually, I think UK was kind of a melting pot for a lot of styles.
Yeah.
You didn't think about differences between scenes back in the days. I mean, 90s, the early 90s, the end of 80s, you just mixed it.
Yeah, that's right. It was much more healthier. I mean, electro music back then could be 100 beat per minute, or it could be 130, you know, or even slower than that. So, and there was, I mean, now a lot of it, especially the synth pop music, you know, like Ultravox, Human League, that's the kind of music I first got into. And some people called it electro, some people called it synth pop, or minimal wave, or whatever they call it nowadays. But to me, that was like proper electro at the time. And then, of course, Planet Rock happened, and that was a catalyst for everything else that sort of came after that. And I think once the scene from Detroit and Chicago really hit the UK around 86, and I think it was some UK journalists that were actually naming it techno and house. Maybe not techno, but I'm sure they called it, I can't remember now. But yeah, there was some journalists came back to the UK and said, like, this is the latest thing, and everyone just exploded, you know. And then acid house house happened, and then it all changed overnight. And the sad thing about that was the bands that I admired, like John Fox and Tick and Tock and all these early synth bands, they kind of got forgotten about a little bit, and everything was about the rave scene and techno, which was good fun, but they were standing on the shoulders of these other people that were kind of getting ignored. But the good thing was, around the year 2000, you had the electro clash scene that I think came out of New York at the time, and they were starting to merge a lot more 80s music of all genres.
New wave.
Yeah, so like Fisher Spooner and bands like that. And I thought, oh good, it's starting to come back again. A lot of people didn't like electro clash at the time, but maybe they were closed-minded, I don't know. And a lot of it was aimed at the mainstream dance scene, which wasn't so good, for me anyway. It's like a few years ago, like 10 years ago, the word electro was something different. It was more to do with house music, wasn't it? For some reason, I don't know what happened there. Yeah, definitely, because in the 90s, in the UK especially, it was either drum and bass or very hard, like gabba techno, which to me personally, I just was not interested in half of that at all. I didn't mind some drum and bass. But luckily, you obviously had Doppler Effect and Aux 88 and these bands, Anthony Rother, they were keeping like proper electro and techno alive. And so that got me back into it really, because at that time I just thought, oh well, it's just a hobby, something I do in my bedroom. But I teamed up with some local guys. There was Transparent Sound and Rob Euro in Brighton, and we were sort of collaborating again, getting our machines out. So by the time the year 2000 arrived, the electro scene was really back. But this time it was called electro properly. Because the only reason things like Egyptian Lover and Planet Rock were called electro back in the 80s was because no one knew what to call it. But if you actually speak to some of those old school guys, they thought they were making hip hop. They didn't use the term electro much. And that was, because I actually spoke to Egyptian Lover and he said, no, we just called it old school hip hop. The term electro was something that we introduced to them. They didn't even know that they were making electro music until we came along and went, oh no, you're making electro. Are we? Oh, okay. Yeah, fine. Let's go with that. It all boils down to, do you remember the Street Sounds albums in the 80s? They were a big thing in the UK. If you want to check out the roots of electro funk, shall we say, just go to Street Sounds Electro numbers 1 to sort of 7 or 8, and you'll hear everything that came out, mainly American. But it's a great time. It's a great time for music. Very exciting. But because we labelled those series electro, that's the name that stuck. But half of the records on those albums were actually hip-hop artists just using drum machines. So it was kind of like electro hip-hop in a way. And that's what they called the albums later on. They had to change the name of the albums to electro hip-hop. So, but obviously a few hardcore fans like myself, we hung on to the name electro. And by the year 2000, everyone, that was the start of the internet as well, so everyone was connecting up in all these different cities all over the world. And that's when I sort of reached out and sent demos to all these labels that were starting up, and kind of like the time I started, getting stuff out on vinyl. It was around that time. There was World Electric in Germany, really good label, and they'd started in the 90s. Producing electro and techno sort of hybrid tracks, but they were one of the first labels to bring out electro, the modern version of electro. So it was good to be associated with labels like that.
Ibiza Global Radio. Music sounds better with us.
that you anticipated has been cancelled.
tell me something about the second summer of love? Did you listen to acid house back then, or maybe you was a punk rocker, or what?
I was a punk rocker about 10 years earlier, but I was a kid, so my sister was a punk rocker. But acid house, yeah, I liked acid house in 1988 because it was fresh and it was new. And yes, I used to go to raves back then, and they were probably the first raves. And yeah, it was crazy because in 1987, I was a teenager at the time. So yeah, in say for instance in 1986, 87, you'd go to a nightclub and you'd probably listen to Farley Jack Master Funk, but you'd be there in your trousers and your shirt, and you had to wear shoes to get into the club, and everyone was jacking their body, and it was fun. But then all of a sudden, a year later, it's acid, and you got a shirt on with polka dots, and you could wear jeans and trainers, and clubs suddenly turned into massive warehouses, and people with glow sticks and riding invisible bicycles upside down on the floor. It was quite crazy, actually. It was fun and it was exciting because you felt everybody was free. It's almost like up until then we'd all been restricted and we had to behave ourselves, and it was like snapping an elastic band, and it was like the birth of a new modern youth culture that hasn't ended. It's still there. Really, we're living in that world that was created back then. Yeah, I mean, now it's huge. I mean, you look at DJs now, and they get paid stupid money, and they're not doing anything different to what we did back then, But it was good. I mean, we used to do gigs. There was a friend of mine, he became Crafty Cuts, really good turntablist. And I did a gig with him once, and Shut Up and Dance were there. That was quite a mad night. I don't know if you remember Shut Up and Dance. And Shut Up and Dance were considered like the birth of jungle and drum and bass, because they were mixing a lot of old electro records and playing them at 45 instead of 33 and speeding everything up. Very exciting times.
Have you read the book Last Night a DJ Saved My Life from...
I've actually got it, but I haven't read it yet. It's on my to-do list. I'm sort of going through reading up again about Kraftwerk at the moment. And then I'm going to do Gary Newman, and then I'm going to do Last Night a DJ Saved My Life. I make lists of books I'm going to read. I'm a slow reader because I like to take it in. But yeah, I think that book's going to be very interesting. Yeah, there is another one, David Toop, he's written some good books. The Rap Attack book, which came out in, I think, 84, 85. And it's more about hip-hop, but from an electro point of view, it's still quite interesting because you can see where people like Bambaataa were getting influenced by Kraftwerk rather than James Brown. So you can see the emergence of electronic music into funk, I'd say, rather than actual hip-hop. It was part of hip-hop culture. And I think where hip-hop became something completely different, as soon as Public Enemy came out, it went more darker, which was good music, but electro got just pushed aside and everyone was left standing thinking, what do we do with these drum machines, And I think that's probably why techno and acid house sort of took the place of electro, because it's almost like hip-hop said, no, we don't do that sort of music anymore. And people like me were thinking, yeah, but I like electronic music, I don't want to listen to sampled breaks all day. As much as I love sampled breaks, and I love breaks, in the history of break beats. Yeah, because I love bands like Tangerine Dream and Brian Eno, and when I was growing up, it was all electronic music to me at that time. You didn't put labels on it so much. I think the labels have been put on today, and I think that in a way it's good. I think it's good for the listeners and for the people who are searching for music. But I think if you've been listening to music for a long time and you hear a DJ mix and it is just all the same tempo and the same bit of music. It's good, but I like a little bit more variety. Do you know what I mean? I like to hear eclectic mixes. That's what my favourite style of DJing is. The funny thing is, when I first heard Boards of Canada, I didn't get it, and someone said to me, "You will, you'll get it." It was suddenly, and I did. Yeah, it took me about a couple of months, and then one day I think I'd been listening to it on my headphones. And then I hadn't listened to it for a while, and then I heard one of the tracks again, and I was like, oh my god, this music is amazing. How come I didn't realise at the time? And it's just so clever. I mean, apparently they just started off doing parties in Scotland with like reel-to-reels and just found sound. So yeah, what they were doing is very similar to what the Art of Noise were doing probably about 8 years earlier, or no, even longer than that, actually, about 15 years. I think in the 90s there was that's when electronic music became really underground, especially in the UK, because it was very about the superstar DJing in the UK at the time, which I really didn't like it. The main DJ scene in the UK, I thought it was a bit blown out of proportion, so I was really listening to a lot of the underground artists, because that's when I think modern electro as we know it today started in the 90s, definitely, even though you can hark back to the 70s for some of the sounds. I think the actual scene that we're still part of started in the 90s, when the kids that were listening to it in the 80s went out and bought a kit and started doing their own gigs. And they're still doing it today, a lot of people, and I'm part of that generation. So are you probably. Yeah, so that's what I like to do. And sometimes if I do have a break from music, it isn't actually to get away from music. I'll probably study music, listening to music, or I discover a new artist, like you say, and then you've got to go on Discogs and think, oh no, they've got like hundreds of releases, how long is this going to take? And you can spend a whole week just listening to one artist, you know. Yeah, and especially now when you go on SoundCloud and there's just like hundreds of people, and I think it's Behringer's fault. I think Behringer are trying to take over the planet. They've grabbed the 1970s and the 1980s and they said, look, we're going to do it again. And they have. And the thing is, they must be selling this kit to somebody for them to make it so cheap. Because when you've worked in engineering, if you design something, build it, put it in a box, test it, that costs a lot of money, research and development. So if you're going to sell something for a few £100, you're going to have to shift a lot of them, which means there's not a few thousand people buying these synthesizers. There must be millions of people buying it. And why? And what are they doing? Is it a secret revolution that's going to take over the world? I think so. I think there's probably some 18-year-old kids out there right now with a couple of little analog boxes, and that's the future. That's what we have to keep an eye on, and that's what's exciting about it. You know, I'd like to see some bands similar to, say, the Human League, you know, Ultravox. I'd like to see some more of that, and I'm sure there is plenty of it out there. It's just you've got to really search for it these days. Radio 1 are not going to play it on the radio. They're too busy playing all the mundane music. So I think the future's bright for electronic music. I think it's going to become bigger and bigger. And there'll be, you know, once lockdown's finished, hopefully there'll be more dedicated avenues for these new bands to come out and take over the world.
Well, unfortunately the time is up and we are finishing the show. Thank you, Kurt, for your interview and your music.
Thank you. Yeah, nice speaking to you. Bye.
Well, you've been listening to MixCult with Kirill Matviev and Mr. Robert, the curator of a new label Believe in Records. And the first release is open for pre-order on MixCult Bandcamp and Believe in Records Bandcamp page. We will meet you again next week at the same time with new dubs from residents of MixCult Records. More info you can find on mixcult.net or in our social networks. Stay safe, feel well, call your friends and family, and take care.
Ibiza Global Radio. Music sounds better with us.